Messages from beyond are something I always take with a grain of salt. While I do believe in ghosts, spirits, and the unknown, I also believe in science, so I'm more likely to believe in signs instead of words. Question for you, what do you believe? Let me know in the comments and let's talk about some crazy experiences today. So for our stories, I ventured over to good old Reddit, and we're starting off today with one from Needs Answers Nows. Let's call him Answers for safety. So a few years ago, his sister sadly took her own life, and he put that in quotation marks because he still doesn't believe that it was a self-taken death, and that's because she left no explanation for anybody, and more so didn't tell him anything before it. He mentioned that they were only a year apart in age and extremely close, which all the power to you. My brother and I could never. This story was written after the events of a certain morning, which left him kind of rattled and upset. So he was asleep in bed with his girlfriend when both of them got woken up by his cell phone going off at 3:37 a.m. See, I know if I woke up and saw a private number, like he described, calling me during the witching hour, I'd be sending it to voicemail for safety reasons. But he was like, hey, I think it's a drunk friend, they might need a ride, so he's like, I'll pick it up. He said hello, and all he could hear was this muffled kind of static sounding situation. Nobody was replying, so once again it's like, hello? Once again, no answer, so he's like, okay, probably just a prank call, and he was about to hang up when he heard his name, which that was coming through as clear as day and sounded 100% like his sister. Naturally, he kind of froze and started to panic and said her name a few times, pretty much pleading for it to be her. Then all he heard was, I'm sorry, I love you, please help me. That last bit was what made him upset and uneasy. He asked where she was, then he heard a really loud screeching tone, and then it went back to the dial tone. After that, he turned towards his girlfriend, and she was kind of concerned, being like, yo, why are you so pale, and why are you saying your sister's name? The poor guy had to take the day off of work from shock, and I hope he gets some closure for his sake, because that sounds like a nightmare. Okay, I had to include at least one bad Ouija story today, so thank you Ivy McCarthy for providing this one. So when she was barely in the double digits of age, she was staying over at her friend's house and they decided to bust out the board. They grabbed the planchette and started asking questions. For whatever reason, Ivy was like, hey, Ouija board, am I ever gonna be harmed? It said yes and proceeded to spell out how old she would be, what grade she'd be in, and the last name of the person who would do it. Fast forward 2 years later, all those predictions came true, even down to the name. Oh, that's not even the worst of it though. A year after that, Ivy was having trouble sleeping and remembered waking up one night in absolute terror. She'd had a dream that someone dear to her had passed away, but she didn't know this person. All she knew was that his name was Adam and that he passed away very suddenly in the night. So she wrote about it in her journal, wrote some poetry about it, went back to sleep, and overall just forgot it. Fast forward to age 25, so she forgot about this, right? She was engaged to a man at this point. Yeah, guess what his name was? Adam. So he passed away from an accidental overdose the night before Super Bowl 2006. She was devastated and recalled the dream she'd had all those years ago. She found her journal and she was like, ah, great, a premonition. She doesn't know if she came into contact with something that night with the Ouija board or if she tapped into something else entirely, but that was the end of her Ouija board tinkering. Which, hey, should have never happened. If something is going to happen, she'd rather not know. The guilt was absolutely crushing, and it took a very long time for her to realize that it wasn't her fault. I'm not saying it is your fault, but if you're putting that energy out into the universe, it's gonna come back to you. So I actually happen to know a thing or two about manifesting and signs, so I thought I would take this part of the video to actually share some stories about my life. So I was weird when I was little. Heck, I still am. Take a look at me, I kinda stand out in a crowd. So because of that, I didn't really have a lot of friends until grade 5 when a girl named Katie decided we were gonna be besties. I had just switched schools and she was like, I like you. She always went out of her way to make sure I felt included. I went over to her place for sleepovers and honestly, I didn't know I was bi yet, but I probably had a crush on her. She was athletic, she played hockey, she was gorgeous. Fast forward to partway through grade 7. There was a night where I had a dream that I was at a funeral, and like any weird dream, woke up, felt weirded out. I probably told her about it for a laugh, I don't remember, it's been a minute, and I went about my day. So a week later, there was a day where Katie wasn't at school. She had gone home sick from early morning hockey practice, her dad had taken her home, and that afternoon the principal came on the PA and told the whole school that Katie and her dad had been in a train accident that morning and didn't make it. It's a day I'll never forget. Every year on that day, I know exactly what day it is. And having that predictive dream only scared me to my core. For a solid year after, whenever I had a dream involving somebody I knew, I would be terrified it would come true. And I didn't tell anybody about it for the longest time because I didn't know what to believe. I don't think I've predicted anything since, but I've had visitors in my dream and I've received signs from the dead. It's not nice. I wouldn't really wish it on anybody. I've had some other weird stuff happen too. When I was working at a haunted house years ago in an old movie theater, I used to have a poltergeist mess with all the dolls I'd set up in my room for ambiance. In both years, on Halloween night specifically, that room would be ice cold no matter how many heaters we shoved into it. Yeah, I've had some nice messages from those who have passed on as well, but they aren't as many. When my grandma passed in December of last year, I kept seeing poppies everywhere and the Leafs went on a bit of a winning streak. So something you need to know about my grandma, she was never subtle, ever. She was a die-hard Leafs fan. Like, one of the last things she asked about was the score of the previous night's game. And she was a Legion lady who helped out a lot with the Poppy campaign. Love you, Grandma. Miss you, Grandma. Before I burst into tears, here's a story from We Get It Ron, You're a Guy. So his family has always been big into the paranormal, and they all have their own personal experiences with ghosties and things that they couldn't explain. So because of that, he's always believed in ghosts, even though he didn't really have a personal encounter with one for most of his life. Well, that was until one fateful night in high school. His parents had recently gone through a divorce, and he was living with his dad at the time, since his mom worked the night shift at a casino as a drink girl to make ends meet. It was the middle of the night on a school night when he got woken up by his cell phone going off. So he wakes up, looks at the caller ID, and says, "Caller unknown," late at night. Uh-oh. But he's like, I'll pick up the phone anyway, and what he heard on the other end haunts him to this day. So as you would, hello? He heard what sounded like wind on the other end, like somebody was running. He said hello a few more times before he heard a woman screaming his name, pleading for him to help her. She kept screaming, followed by, "Ben! Ben! Help me! Ben, help me!" The wind coming through the receiver was so loud that it almost drowned out the woman. Now, at first he thought it was his mom, and she was getting attacked after getting off her shift, so he was hysterically screaming back, "Mom! Mom!" And she replied with the same panicked and desperate cry for help. This continued for what felt like a couple of minutes, and then the call ended. At this point, Ben was in tears, and he raced to wake up his dad and be like, "This is going on. Mom needs help. I need help." Gibberish. Thankfully, his dad was able to get him to calm down, reassure him that he would get a hold of the mom, and get Ben back to bed. The next morning, Ben woke up hoping that he was just having a really bad nightmare, so he's like, okay, I'm gonna check the call log on my phone just to be safe. So he opens it up. Well, caller unknown was still logged. He checked to see exactly how long he was on the phone for, and it said 8 minutes, which was weird because he didn't remember being on the phone that long. So he gets to school and he's like, okay buddies, which one of you feels like they were a prankster last night? None of them fessed up, none of them did it. Thankfully, he did find out that his mom was perfectly fine, she wasn't being attacked the night before, but what his dad told him the next night was kind of nightmare-worthy in its own way. Turns out that his great-grandma had passed away that night, about an hour before he got the phone call. Yep, okay, we're moving on because I'm feeling those tears coming back. Our last tale today comes from Agua61, who had a weird voicemail experience. In 2005, their 79-year-old dad was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He lived in the town Agua grew up in, about 140 miles away from where they live now, but not the house they grew up in. And their mom died in 1999, so the dad remarried and moved into his new wife's home. But as the dad got towards the end of his life, like late 70s, he wasn't doing so well with health. And the stepmom, being a little bit older than dad, also couldn't really care for him at that stage. The family knew it was coming, so Agua arranged to take a leave of absence in the fall of 2006 when the dad started having difficulty caring for himself, which amazing that you can do that. They moved back into the old house they grew up in, cleaned it up, aired it out, and moved dad in and cared for him until he died in the house around the end of that year. So they returned to the office following the New Year's holiday. They're like, okay, back to work I go. And in February of that year, 2 months after the dad had passed, Agua finally made partner with the law firm after being there for almost a decade. They knew their dad would have been very proud, and they expressed that to family, friends, folks at the office several times. It's like, wish Dad had been here to see this. Like, I get that. Both my grandmothers passed in the last 5 years, and there's been a lot of times where I wish they were alive to see some incredible things I've gotten to do. So seeing as Agua had inherited the old home and the land that accompanied it, they ended up going there every 2 weeks during the summers to cut the grass. Many months went by, maybe a year, and they'd kind of given up wondering if their dad was going to make contact because nothing was really happening in the old house. It wasn't until one Friday night and they got in and they noticed, oh, there's a couple of voicemails on the answering machine. Usually they were just like robocalls from a politician or recorded marketing pitches, wrong number, the usual junk. Agua went through them, erasing them as they went, until they got to a very peculiar one, which was very garbled sounding. You could tell it was a man's voice, but it sounded like the voice itself was static. And they were trying to spell out everything that this voice was saying phonetically, breaking it down in syllables, and the voice was saying, Wahoo ura, ule ura, mehi paha. And there was another voice in the background saying 2 words, which was like, yeah. They're very aware that it sounds like an EVP recording, and they're like, I've never touched one of those tools, I don't want to touch one of those tools. They consulted their wife, and they're convinced that it was trying to say, want to congratulate you on making partner. And hey, if it wasn't a spirit voice, it was a horrible, horrible connection. Like, not even a voice box for people who have lost their voice, you know? Is that garble sounding? It really didn't sound like what Agua associated with a bad connection, in the sense that the message wasn't as broken up as if the call was dropping out, it just was kind of butchered. And that's it for me once again, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident Ookie Spooky Girl, and hey, if you enjoyed my ramblings today, get to help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more scary voice messages from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.